Mom, please, don't make me go in there. The words cut through the evening air like a knife. I froze, keys slipping from my hand, the jingle echoing across the driveway. My heart thumped so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the distant hum of traffic. He was gripping my arm, small hands trembling, eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen before. "Jason, honey, you're overreacting," I started, but he shook his head violently. "No, you don't get it. You can't make me go in there. Not tonight." His voice broke, raw and pleading. I could feel the tension radiating off him, the cold sweat on his little neck, the way his body pressed against mine as if I could somehow shield him from what awaited inside. And in that moment, I realized I had no idea how I was going to face it myself. The door loomed before us dark, unwelcoming, a silent witness to what I already feared. I could see the faint glow of the hallway lights spilling into the foyer, but that faint warmth did nothing to comfort me. The air smelled faintly of perfume and something else I couldn't place, a metallic, bitter edge that made my stomach churn. I wanted to run. Part of me wanted to just grab him and disappear into the night, leave everything behind, but I couldn't. My son's safety, his innocence, he depended on me, and somehow, I had to find the courage to step inside, even knowing the storm that waited. I took a slow, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself, my hand pressed to my chest. The noise behind me, the subtle squeak of the gate, the distant bark of a dog felt deafening in the stillness of our suburban street. Jason's grip on my sleeve tightened. I glanced down at him, and for a second, I saw a flicker of my own fear, mirrored in his young eyes. Then I saw him. Through the glass of the front door, a shadow shifted. He wasn't moving toward us yet, just standing there, silent, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I could see the outline of his broad shoulders, the way he leaned slightly against the doorframe, as if he owned not just the house, but everything in it. My stomach dropped, a cold knot forming at the base of my spine. I wanted to tell Jason to go back to the car. I wanted to tell him this wasn't safe. But there was no time. The moment had already arrived, and it was worse than I had imagined. "Mom," Jason whispered again, his voice trembling. "I saw him. He's in there. Just, please, don't make me go." I knelt to meet his eyes, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Jason, look at me. Whatever's inside, we face it together, okay?" He nodded, but I could see the quiver in his chin, the silent sob threatening to escape. My own throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to run, to melt into the night, but I couldn't. I had to be the stronger one. I had to open that door. I reached for the knob. The metal was cold under my fingers. I paused, feeling the weight of every memory, every lie, every betrayal tied up with the person waiting on the other side. The hallway light flickered for a second, like a warning, like it knew the chaos that was about to spill into our lives. Jason pressed his small hand over mine. "Mom, please." "Diender." And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just opening a door. I was stepping into a storm I had ignored for too long. The person behind that door, he had been waiting. And whatever was about to happen, nothing could prepare me for the sight that would greet me. I turned to Jason, brushing my fingers over his trembling hand. "Stay close," I whispered. Then I pushed. The door swung open with a creak that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. And there, in the middle of the foyer, standing as if nothing had changed, was the person who had shattered so much of my life without even lifting a hand. My breath caught, my heart hammered, and I realized that nothing, no warning, no preparation could have readied me for this moment. He looked up, and the smile that crossed his face was not the smile of a friend, not the smile of a neighbor, not even the smile of a father. It was a smile that promised pain. Jason froze beside me, his small frame rigid. I felt him press closer, clinging to my leg, searching for the courage he didn't have. And in that instant, I understood the weight of every choice I had ever made. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and escape with him, leave it all behind. But I couldn't, because that was who I was now, a mother. And sometimes, Being a mother meant facing the unimaginable. The question that tore through me, sharper than any knife, wasn't about me, it was about him. Who had been waiting inside, and why? And as I took that first step forward, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Whatever I found behind that door was going to change everything. Would I survive what I was about to see? Or would my son and I be trapped in a nightmare we couldn't escape? I didn't want to believe it, but I had to face the truth. Our lives weren't simple. My name is Rachel, and I've spent the last 10 years trying to build a safe life for my son, Jason. A life that, I thought, was grounded in love, trust, and normalcy. But that night, standing on the driveway, I realized normal had been an illusion. Jason is 8, bright, perceptive, and more aware of people's hidden intentions than I ever gave him credit for. He's the kind of kid who notices tension in a room before anyone else, who can read a person in a glance. That awareness made him cautious, sometimes even fearful, but it also made him resilient in ways I would come to need. The man behind that door, my ex-husband Mark, was the opposite of Jason, commanding, manipulative, and dangerous in a way that never showed in polite society. On the surface, he looked like a devoted father, the kind of guy people would trust in a heartbeat. His smile could charm a room, but it was all a mask. Beneath it, he thrived on control, on bending people to his will. I'd learned that the hard way. Mark had been charming the first time we met, the kind of man who made the world seem full of possibilities. I was young, hopeful, and looking for someone who could make me laugh, make me feel safe. But over time, I realized I wasn't being loved, I was being controlled. Every argument, every misunderstanding, was a test, a way to chip away at my confidence until I felt dependent, small, afraid to step out of line. Jason didn't deserve any of that. That's why I had fought so hard to protect him, to shield him from Mark's manipulations. After the divorce, I moved across town, changed schools, changed routines, but some things follow you no matter how far you run. That night, that door, that shadow waiting inside it was a reminder that the past doesn't let go easily. Even our home, modest, suburban, filled with the warmth I tried to create, carried memories of what I had endured. The walls were painted in soft shades of beige, family photos lining the hallways, little markers of happiness that I had clung to like lifeboats. And yet, I knew that no amount of color, no amount of normal, could erase what had happened. Supporting characters had played their parts too, in ways subtle yet crucial. There was my best friend, Laura, who had been my anchor when the divorce hit hardest. She knew all the messy details, the phone calls at 3 a.m. when Mark had crossed another line, the moments when I doubted my own judgment. Laura had always reminded me that fear is not a reason to stop living, but I'd learned the hard way that some dangers could not be ignored. Even the neighbors, people who smiled politely at the mailbox or waved from across the street, contributed to the tension. Some were innocuous, some curious, some judging without knowing the half of it. It was a small American town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, or at least thinks they do. Mark's charm worked here, and that made it even more dangerous. On the day of the driveway confrontation, I could feel the weight of these relationships pressing down. Jason's fear mirrored mine, though he would never say it aloud. I was the adult, the protector, but suddenly, standing there, I realized protection wasn't enough. Sometimes, the only way to survive was to see clearly, to name the danger, and to face it head-on. Mark's presence was magnetic and terrifying at the same time. He had that way of making people question themselves, doubt their instincts, even in the middle of clear danger. I remembered arguments where he'd twist my words, his voice calm, almost tender, while I spiraled in confusion. That same man, smiling from the hallway of our home, could undo years of courage with a single glance. And yet, there was another side to him. I couldn't ignore the side Jason instinctively knew not to trust. The subtle tension in the way he stood, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the doorframe, the careful calculation behind his eyes. That was the Mark I had taught Jason to recognize. That was the Mark I had spent years preparing to fight against. My own flaws, too, were present in that moment. I wasn't fearless. I wasn't invincible. I had allowed myself to hope that things could stay calm, that we could all coexist after the divorce. I wanted to believe that Mark could change, that Jason wouldn't see the darker patterns I had endured. And that hope, fragile as it was, made the confrontation on the driveway even more piercing. As I stood there, I also thought about the ordinary things, the small rituals of our life that Mark could never take away. Jason's love for drawing, his tendency to narrate every little thing in vivid detail, the way he laughed when he thought no one was listening. Those little moments were our armor, our reasons to fight, the proof that our bond could withstand even someone like him. I took a deep breath, forcing my chest to calm, feeling Jason's small hand still gripping mine. I reminded myself that courage is not the absence of fear, it's action in spite of it. I had a choice. Retreat and leave Jason exposed, or step forward and face whatever awaited inside, knowing it could shatter us or teach us how to survive. And in that suspended moment, I realized the story wasn't just about fear or revenge, it was about awakening. About understanding the kind of mother I needed to be, and the kind of life I needed to reclaim. Every memory, every scar, every whispered warning from my past coalesced into one truth. I would not let him take Jason from me. Not tonight, not ever. But even as I steeled myself, I knew the journey had only begun. The person waiting inside held the power to upend everything. And my son's plea, the raw, aching, desperate plea, reminded me that the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. Because this wasn't just about opening a door, it was about confronting the entire history we had tried to escape. And that confrontation, I sensed, was only the beginning. The first few days after that driveway moment were a blur of hesitation and quiet fear. Jason refused to talk about what he had seen, or rather, who he had seen, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a fire. Every time the phone rang, he flinched. Every knock at the door made his shoulders tighten. And every time I looked at him, I felt the weight of the life we were both trapped in. It started small. Mark would text at odd hours, messages carefully crafted to make me doubt myself. "Are you sure Jason is safe? He seems off." The words seemed harmless, almost polite. But the intent was poison, a subtle erosion of confidence. I hated how easily they made me second-guess my choices. Even my own instincts, sharpened from years of vigilance, wavered under the pressure. At school, Jason's teachers noticed a change. He used to be lively, eager to share stories about his day, drawing pictures for everyone to see. Now, he kept to himself, sketching quietly in the corner, glancing over his shoulder whenever he laughed. The other kids noticed too. He was quieter, more reserved, and I realized that Mark's presence, even indirectly, had reached into every corner of our lives. The first confrontation came one afternoon when I returned from work to find the living room in disarray. Drawers slightly open, papers on the floor, Jason's favorite toys scattered. He stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide. "Mom, I didn't touch anything," he said, voice trembling. I dropped my bag and went to him, brushing his hair back. "Did someone come in?" Jason shook his head. I think it's him. I saw him outside the window yesterday, watching." My stomach clenched. He was right. Mark was capable of this kind of intimidation, turning our home, our sanctuary, into a place of fear. That night, I tried to talk to Mark on the phone. My voice was calm, but inside, every word was laced with dread. "Mark, stop coming near the house. Jason is scared." "Scared? Of what, Rachel?" "I just want to see my son," he said smoothly. But beneath the practiced charm, I could hear the undercurrent of threat. "You know, I could make this difficult if you keep standing in the way." Every sentence he spoke was a test, every pause a trap. I ended the call with my hands shaking, heart pounding, realizing that the battle wasn't just about Jason's safety, it was about asserting control, proving who had power. Days turned into weeks. Every visit from Mark, whether direct or through the subtle manipulations of emails, texts, or a casual appearance near Jason's school, felt like a small fracture in our lives. Jason would retreat into silence, and I would spend hours pacing the house, imagining every possible scenario, every hidden danger, every lie that Mark might be spinning. Even friends noticed. Laura came over one evening, concern etched across her face. "Rachel, you're not sleeping. And Jason, he's changed. You can't keep doing this alone." "I know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But what am I supposed to do? If I step back, Mark wins. And if I step forward, I don't know if I can protect Jason from what he's capable of." It was true. Mark's manipulations weren't obvious. He never yelled, never hit, never left a bruise, but his control ran deep. He used guilt, charm, and fear interchangeably, like a puppeteer pulling invisible strings. He made me question every decision, every plan, every instinct, and Jason was the one who felt it first. One evening, after a particularly tense school pickup, I tried to distract him, to offer a semblance of normalcy. "Hey, how about we bake cookies? Your favorite chocolate chip?" Jason hesitated, eyes darting toward the front yard. I don't feel like it," he muttered. "Why not?" I asked softly. "I'm just tired, Mom. Everything's weird." The word weird carried layers of fear, caution, and mistrust. I knew it. I felt it. And I realized how deeply Mark's shadow had seeped into our everyday lives. The tension escalated the following weekend. I had arranged a playdate for Jason with a neighbor's son. Everything was fine until I noticed Mark's car parked across the street, engine off, as if he had nothing better to do than watch. Jason froze, staring out the window. I can't go out there," he whispered. I knelt beside him. "You don't have to. He's just a car, okay? You're safe here. I'm stowed in the wide." But the truth was, I didn't know that for sure. Mark had ways of making himself known, of bending situations to his will without a single word being spoken. It was psychological warfare, and Jason was living in the middle of it. Even inside our home, I began noticing the small betrayals. Notes left in Jason's backpack, casual mentions from neighbors who had seen Mark near the school, calls from strangers asking questions about our routine. Every intrusion chipped away at the illusion of safety I had tried so hard to create. I spent nights reading parenting books on managing fear, counseling tips for anxious children, even guides on dealing with manipulative ex-partners. But nothing could prepare me for the way Jason's eyes would look at me when he was scared, trusting, pleading, desperate, and I felt powerless. One night, after Mark had sent another veiled threat via text, Jason came into my room, sleeping bag in tow. "Mom, I don't want to sleep alone." I swallowed hard, my own eyes burning. "You don't have to. You never have to. I'm right here." We curled up on the floor, his little body pressed to mine. I whispered reassurances, though the tremor in my own voice betrayed my fear. That night, the lines between protector and child blurred. I was fighting for his safety, but he was fighting for mine too, in a way only a child could. Weeks passed, and the tension escalated further. Mark started showing up at unexpected times one morning at Jason's school, smiling charmingly at the teachers, asking casually about his schedule, leaving a trail of unease behind him. Every encounter forced me to calculate, anticipate, and guard, and the weight of it began to crush me. By the time Jason and I returned home from that last confrontation on the driveway, I could feel the slow buildup of anger and fear simmering beneath my skin. It wasn't just about Mark, it was about the betrayals layered into our lives, the psychological traps, the emotional manipulation that Jason couldn't name, and I could barely articulate. And then, as we approached the door, I noticed something that made my stomach drop, a faint light flickering through the blinds of the living room, as if someone was already waiting, watching. Jason clutched my hand tighter. His whisper cut through the quiet. "Mom, it's him. He's inside. He's been waiting. Ask us no work." At that moment, I realized that the tension, the fear, the manipulations, it had all been leading up to this. The danger wasn't distant anymore. It wasn't theoretical. It was here, inside our home, and the life we had tried to rebuild was dangling by a thread. I squared my shoulders and looked down at Jason. "We're going in," I said, voice calm but firm. And as the door creaked open once more, The familiar smell of his cologne, the subtle authority in his posture, and the hint of a smirk on his face told me one thing: the real confrontation was only beginning. Because some betrayals aren't revealed in words, some are revealed in presence. And Mark's presence had never been more threatening. The moment I stepped through that front door, the air felt heavier, almost suffocating. The faint glow of the hallway light revealed Mark standing there, smiling as if nothing had changed, like he hadn't spent years manipulating, intimidating, and controlling both Jason and me. But this time, I saw it clearly. That smile wasn't charm. It was cruelty, coated in civility. "Rachel," he said, voice calm, almost casual. "You made it. I was beginning to think you'd chicken out." Jason clutched my hand so tightly my fingers ached. "Mom, please." His whisper trembled with terror, yet there was a glimmer of defiance. Even at 8, he understood the danger in the room. Mark tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Your son. He's been telling me things. About how scared you are. About how weak you've become without me." I froze. I hadn't said anything, hadn't given him an opening, and yet, somehow, he knew. Somehow, he always knew. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm of fear inside me, Don't talk about Jason like that." He laughed softly, a sound that made my blood run cold. "Oh, Rachel, you think this is about him? No, it's about you, always has been." My heart raced. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Years of subtle manipulation, emotional abuse, and control had led to this. And now, the veil was gone. I saw him for what he really was, not just a threat, but a man who thrived on breaking people from the inside out. I wanted to run, to take Jason, and escape, but the house seemed to close in around me. Every picture on the wall, every trace of our lives, felt like it was taunting me, reminding me of what he had taken: my confidence, my peace, my sense of safety. "Why are you here, Mark?" I asked, voice shaking. "Why are you doing this to Jason?" He stepped closer, and my stomach knotted. "Doing this? I'm just reminding you of your failures, Rachel, of what happens when you can't keep control. Jason, he knows who's in charge. He knows who protects him, and he's scared because you've failed him in small ways, haven't you?" Jason tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Mom, tell him to stop." "I am stopping him, Jason. I'm stopping him right now," I said firmly, even though my own body betrayed my fear. Mark's smirk widened. "You think you can stop me? You've been pretending for years, pretending you're strong, pretending you're capable. But deep down, Rachel, you're just like every other person I've bent to my will. Weak, afraid, desperate." I could feel my chest tighten. My throat burned. And suddenly, it hit me the depth of his betrayal. Not just to me, but to Jason. All those years of trust I thought we had, all the nights I had comforted my son, telling him we were safe, and he had been here, all along, undermining us, poisoning our lives from the inside out. "I trusted you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, shaking with rage and heartbreak. "I trusted you with my son, with our lives. And you," he interrupted, calm and unflinching, "you trusted the wrong person." The room seemed to shrink. Jason's small frame pressed against mine, and I could feel his fear radiating. "Mom, I don't want to be here. Please." "I know, sweetheart," I whispered, holding him tighter. "I know." And then it happened, the first real act of betrayal that pushed me past shock into raw, searing anger. Mark's hands, steady and deliberate, reached for Jason's backpack, rifling through it as if it were his right. He pulled out a small notebook Jason had been keeping, filled with drawings, little stories, and secrets he had never told anyone. He opened it, flipping through pages with mock curiosity. "So this is where he keeps his little thoughts. Cute, isn't it? All your feelings, Jason, and none of them are safe from me." Jason cried out, a small, strangled sound, and I lunged forward, snatching the notebook back. "Don't you touch that!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the house. "You have no right." Mark raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the satisfaction in his eyes. Right? What is right to you, Rachel? You think life is fair? You think I play by your rules? No. I make the rules, and you've been too blind to see it. The betrayal sank deeper than any words could reach. All those subtle manipulations, the whispered doubts, the casual threats, the control over our routines culminated in this moment. He had weaponized our history, our love, our fear, and now he was standing there, unchallenged, a constant threat. I felt something inside me fracture. Part of me wanted to collapse, to let the weight of years and the immediacy of danger crush me, but another part, the part that had fought to protect Jason all these years, ignited. Anger surged, mingled with fear, and gave me clarity. You think you can break me? I said, voice low but firm. You think you can control Jason's life and mine, and leave us in fear forever? Mark tilted his head, his expression unreadable. We'll see, Rachel. That's the thing about life. Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they crumble. And you, well, you've been balancing on that edge for a long time. The betrayal cut both ways. He wasn't just threatening, he had already taken pieces of us. He had infiltrated our home, our routines, our sense of safety. And in that moment, I realized the real heartbreak, the knowledge that our lives would never be untouched again. Jason hid his face against my leg, whispering, "Mom, please, make him go away." I knelt beside him, brushing his hair from his face. I promise, Jason, I won't let him win. Not ever. Mark's smirk lingered, and I could see the tension radiating from him like a tangible thing. He had done exactly what he intended. He had broken the fragile calm of our lives, and he was savoring it. But in that same moment, I also recognized a dangerous truth. His overconfidence could be his downfall. The breaking point wasn't just emotional, it was also a revelation. He had underestimated the bond between Jason and me, underestimated the resilience that fear could forge. And though he didn't know it yet, that bond would become the force that changed everything. You can't take everything, I said, voice rising, shaking but deliberate. Not Jason, not me. You've had your time. But this stops tonight. Mark laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. We'll see, Rachel. We'll see who walks away from this. And in that instant, standing in the doorway of our home, Jason clinging to me, I knew that the betrayal had reached its peak. The emotional rock bottom was behind us. What came next would demand courage, strategy, and a level of awakening I had never experienced before. Because betrayal isn't just about lies or manipulation. It's about taking everything you believe is safe and showing you it never was. And Mark, he had done that. But I would rise. And Jason would survive. The house was quiet now, but the tension still hummed in every corner. Mark had left, or at least retreated temporarily, but the air remained thick with the memory of his presence. Jason sat on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, silent except for the occasional trembling breath. I sank beside him, wrapping my arms around him tightly. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to breathe, but in that quiet, a thought began to form, a spark that had been buried beneath fear and anger. Maybe we weren't powerless after all. I remembered something Laura had said a few weeks ago, during one of our late-night conversations filled with tears and whispered worries. Rachel, you're stronger than you realize. You've been surviving this for years. Sometimes the answer isn't running or hiding, it's seeing clearly and acting. It spited one. Seeing clearly. That phrase echoed in my mind. All those months, all those subtle manipulations, all those tiny betrayals, I had allowed them to define our reality. I had measured my courage in reaction to his presence, instead of shaping my life on my own terms. And in that moment, I understood. I had to act, not just react. I rose from the couch, glancing down at Jason. Sweetheart, can you do something for me? He looked up, eyes wary. Anything. I need you to trust me, I said softly. I'm going to take care of this, but I need you to be brave, too. Can you do that? Jason hesitated, then nodded. His small hand reached for mine. I'll try, Mom. The first step toward turning the tide came in the form of discovery. While cleaning up the living room, I noticed a small stack of papers hidden behind the couch cushions, Mark's subtle fingerprints on our lives, traces of his control. Bills manipulated, notes to teachers, casual letters meant to influence and intimidate. He had been methodically monitoring everything we did, ensuring that fear was never far behind. But the more I examined the evidence, the clearer it became. He had left a trail. Patterns, predictable moves, weaknesses masked as strength. And in that revelation, I felt the first true surge of power I had experienced in years. I wasn't helpless. I could anticipate. I could protect. I could fight back. It wasn't about confrontation yet, it was about understanding. Knowledge, as they say, is power. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that power settling into my bones. I looked at Jason and smiled softly. We're going to be okay, but we have to be smart, we have to plan, and we have to stay together. He leaned against me, his trust a fragile but unbroken thread. That thread would be our anchor. The turning point continued the next morning. I called Laura and confided everything, the fears, the manipulations, the constant presence that had made our lives a living cage. She listened, asked the right questions, and reminded me of resources I had ignored for too long. Legal options, support networks, and ways to protect Jason without escalating danger. Rachel, she said firmly, you've been surviving him. Now it's time to live for yourself and for Jason. You have the right to reclaim your life. And you're not alone in this. End quote. Her words struck deep. I realized that for too long I had carried this alone, believing that my fear and caution were shields. But shields aren't enough against someone who thrives on psychological manipulation. We needed strategy, allies, and clarity. And suddenly, the path forward, though daunting, was visible. That afternoon, I took a small but deliberate action. I rearranged our schedules, changed routines, and set subtle boundaries. No longer would Mark have easy access to our lives. I started documenting everything, every message, every visit, every suspicious occurrence. Each note became a thread of power, a record that could be used to protect Jason and assert our control. By evening, Jason was calmer. He even drew a picture, a small sketch of our family holding hands, safe, smiling. I pinned it to the fridge, letting the symbolism sink in. Hope, resilience, connection. That small act reminded me that even amidst betrayal, we could reclaim joy, agency, and safety. As night fell, I sat by Jason's bedside, watching him drift off to sleep, and I allowed myself a rare thought. Maybe this wasn't just survival anymore. Maybe this was the start of a new chapter, one where Mark's control would no longer define us. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I realized the truth. The turning point wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a fight. It was a moment of awakening, a recognition that fear had a limit, that knowledge could empower, and that the bond between mother and child was stronger than any manipulative force. We had survived the worst of him already. And now, armed with clarity, strategy, and courage, we were ready for the next stage. Because understanding the battlefield is the first step toward victory. And for the first time in years, I believed we could win. The next morning, I woke to the quiet hum of our neighborhood, the kind of ordinary sound that belied the chaos beneath it. Jason was at school, and for a moment, I let myself breathe. I thought we had gained a foothold, just a sliver of control, but the universe had a way of reminding me that nothing was ever simple with Mark. A knock at the door jolted me. Not the casual knock of a neighbor, not the polite tap of a friend. This knock had weight. It carried urgency. My pulse quickened. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Delivery, or maybe not," a voice said, familiar but unexpected. I opened the door, and standing there was a woman I had never met, holding a small, sealed envelope. Her eyes flickered with caution, as if she knew exactly who I was. "This is for you," she said, voice low, "and you need to read it before anyone else sees it." I took the envelope, my hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed carefully. "Rachel, you think you've seen Mark's manipulations, but you don't know the half of it. He isn't acting alone. I froze. I could feel the room spinning. My mind raced. Not alone? What could that possibly mean? The note continued. Someone very close to you has been feeding him information. Someone you trust. Check your contacts, your routines, even the people you let into your life. The person helping him is closer than you think. Agonist help. My stomach dropped. Closer than I think? Closer than Jason or I could have imagined? I spent the next few hours retracing recent interactions, combing through messages, scanning emails, replaying conversations in my mind. A sick realization began to form, and my heart began to pound faster with each passing minute. The signs had been there but subtle, almost imperceptible. Laura. It couldn't be. My best friend, my anchor, the woman who had stayed awake with me, who had reminded me of my strength, who had offered support when the weight of Mark's manipulations felt unbearable. How could she? But the evidence was undeniable. Small miscommunications, suggestions Laura had made that seemed helpful, but subtly undermined me. Messages she had forwarded, conversations she had forgotten to mention. Little breadcrumbs leading straight back to Mark. I sank onto the couch, gripping the letter like a lifeline and a dagger all at once. Jason's safety had been compromised in ways I hadn't anticipated. I felt a wave of betrayal so deep it stole my breath. And then, the twist hit fully, the realization that I had misjudged the battlefield. Mark's power wasn't only in his cunning or charm, it was in alliances I hadn't considered. Someone I had trusted implicitly was giving him inside information, letting him anticipate our every move. I remembered the last few weeks Laura had suggested I relax boundaries, take a step back, maybe let Mark have small victories with Jason to keep the peace. At the time, it sounded like caution, sound advice even, but now, in the light of this revelation, it was a trap, a deliberate handoff of control to Mark. My mind raced. How long had this been happening? How many times had Mark gained an advantage because someone I relied on had been feeding him information? The betrayal cut deeper than any confrontation. At least Mark was an obvious threat. At least I could anticipate his manipulations. But someone trusted. Someone who had shared secrets, who had known my vulnerabilities. That was a danger I had never imagined. I felt a rush of anger, raw and consuming. Tears pricked at the edges of my vision, but underneath them, determination ignited. If Mark's strength came from alliances, then uncovering those alliances would weaken him. If someone had been feeding him information, they could be stopped, and if I acted carefully, I could turn the tables completely. I made a decision then, my voice low but fierce, talking aloud to myself so the room would hear my resolve. If Mark thinks he can control me with hidden allies, he's about to learn something very important. I'm not the same woman he left behind, and he will regret every single thing he's done. The next step was clear. Investigate, gather evidence, and prepare. I would need proof of the betrayal, a strategy for confronting it, and a way to ensure Jason remained safe, no matter what. Because sometimes the biggest threats aren't the ones you see coming. Sometimes they're the ones you trust the most. And now, armed with clarity and the sting of betrayal, I knew we had the chance to take control. The stage was set for a reckoning. And Mark, and whoever had been working with him, had no idea what was coming next. By the time Mark arrived at our house the following evening, I was ready. The fear that had once kept me frozen had been replaced by a calculated calm. Every move, every word, had been anticipated. And Jason stood beside me, small but unflinching, a quiet reminder of why I had to reclaim our lives. Mark's eyes flicked over the living room, assessing, calculating. "You've been busy," he said, a forced smirk on his face. I smiled back, calm and deliberate. "Yes, we have. And we're not done yet." He didn't understand. He never did. He thrived on uncertainty, on keeping me off balance. But this time, I had the clarity he underestimated. The first reversal came subtly. I had gathered evidence, emails, messages, and subtle manipulations all documented, not just for me, but in a way that Jason could understand. Knowledge had become our weapon. When Mark tried his usual intimidation, I countered calmly, presenting facts that undermined his usual charm. Every attempt he made to assert dominance was met with clarity, boundaries, and refusal to play his game. Jason watched quietly, occasionally tugging my sleeve with small, knowing glances. It was as if he recognized the shift too. His small acts of courage mirrored my own. For the first time, he didn't cling in fear. He observed, learned, and stood ready, just as I had taught him. And then came the turning moment. Mark's overconfidence began to crumble. He assumed allies, inside information, and our fear would keep us under his control. And I won't let you control us anymore. Not Jason, not me. Your time is over. The subtle power Mark wielded began slipping. I saw it in his posture, in the twitch at the corner of his eye, in the hesitation that had never existed before. My calm, strategic resistance became a mirror, reflecting back the consequences of his manipulations, and for the first time, he faltered. Jason, small but bold, spoke up. "Dad, you're not scary anymore." His voice, innocent yet firm, landed like a hammer. Mark froze, stunned by the audacity, the courage, the complete lack of fear in his own child. In that moment, the reversal of fate wasn't just mine, it was ours. Jason and I, together, had flipped the balance. What had seemed impossible, the reclaiming of our home, our lives, our power, was now tangible. The manipulator was beginning to unravel under the weight of transparency, truth, and the resilience of those he had underestimated. Mark's attempts to regain control became desperate, clumsy, and ultimately ineffective. Every step he tried to take was anticipated, every word countered. The control he once wielded effortlessly now slipped through his fingers like water. I realized then the truth of the reversal. Fear had been our cage, knowledge our key, and courage our weapon. And with both Jason and me aligned, Mark's reign over our lives had ended before it could take another hold. For the first time in years, we were free, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The house, once thick with tension, now held a quiet triumph, a subtle, victorious energy that only comes when the oppressed reclaim their agency. Mark's smirk had faded, replaced by frustration and disbelief, and as he retreated, no longer the invincible figure from our past, I felt a surge of relief and empowerment that I hadn't known was possible. This was the turning of the tide, and from here, the path to justice, closure, and eventual karma was finally visible. The first ripple of karma came quietly, almost like a whisper, but its effect was devastating for Mark. The evidence I had meticulously gathered over weeks, emails, messages, financial documents, was undeniable. The people he had tried to manipulate, the allies he had counted on, began questioning his intentions. His carefully constructed facade of control began to crumble in the harsh light of truth. Within days, the first calls arrived. Teachers, neighbors, even distant relatives who had once believed his charm started to ask questions. Subtle, polite inquiries at first, but each one chipped away at the illusion of power he had maintained for so long. Then came the official steps, legal warnings, court orders, and formal investigations. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't wanted humiliation for the sake of ego. I had sought safety, clarity, and justice for Jason and myself. But karma, as it turned out, has a way of arriving without warning, and when it did, it hit hard. Mark's reputation began to falter. Stories he thought were hidden quietly surfaced. His allies, those who had once been eager to do his bidding, distanced themselves, wary of the mounting scrutiny. And he couldn't manipulate his way out of this. The evidence was too strong, the truth too clear. The most satisfying moment came not with a grand confrontation, but in quiet observation. Jason, perched on the couch, asked me a simple question. "Mom, is he gone for good?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "He's not gone entirely, sweetheart, but he can't hurt us anymore. Not like he used to. The choices he made are catching up to him. That's karma." And it was true. Mark was no longer the looming, unstoppable presence in our lives. The man who had once controlled every interaction, who had thrived on fear, was now reduced to scrambling, reacting, defending himself against consequences he had ignored for too long. Every attempt to regain control only confirmed to everyone else that his power had slipped. It was a quiet satisfaction, not a triumphant shout. Karma had a subtle way of asserting itself through exposure, through natural consequences, and through the endurance of those he underestimated. And Rachel and Jason, having weathered the storm, were able to watch as the world finally reflected back the imbalance he had created. We had survived, and the universe had done its part to ensure that Mark faced the inevitable. As the days passed, our home felt lighter. Freed from fear, we moved forward with a new rhythm, a renewed bond, and a growing sense of trust, not just in each other, but in the natural order that sometimes, in its own way, ensures justice is served. And in that rhythm, I understood fully. Karma isn't always immediate, and it doesn't always roar, but when it arrives, it is undeniably, irrefutably true. Mark's fall was complete, though quiet. The man who had once commanded rooms with a smile now faced the consequences of a life built on manipulation and control. His allies had abandoned him, his credibility shredded, and the legal system slowly tightened its grip. He was no longer a looming presence in our lives, just a shadow of the man I had feared for so long. Publicly, he appeared composed, but behind closed doors, he wrestled with isolation and the realization that power rooted in fear is fragile and fleeting. Laura, whose betrayal had cut me deeply, also faced her reckoning. Once trusted implicitly, her subtle complicity had left a mark on her relationships. Friends and colleagues began noticing inconsistencies, and she lost much of the social capital she had relied on. She had hoped secrecy would shield her, but the truth surfaced, leaving her with regret and alienation. For Jason, the journey brought clarity and resilience beyond his years. He had witnessed deception, fear, and manipulation, yet had also seen courage, strategy, and moral strength. The experience shaped him, making him empathetic, thoughtful, and fiercely loyal. He understood boundaries, honesty, and trust, not as abstract ideas, but as living principles. And me, Rachel, I was no longer just a survivor. I had become a guardian, a strategist, and a mother who could protect without fear. The confrontation with betrayal, manipulation, and fear had stripped away illusions, leaving only clarity and purpose. Our home was no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary, a place where Jason could laugh without worry, and I could reclaim the life we had almost lost. Looking back, I realized the pain and betrayal were paradoxically the catalysts for my awakening. I had spent years adjusting my life around fear, walking on eggshells, doubting my instincts. But when I faced the truths hidden in quiet corners, the manipulations, the betrayals, the hidden hands guiding my son and me into vulnerability, I saw myself with fresh eyes. Strength, I discovered, is not the absence of fear but the courage to act in spite of it. Power is not about controlling others, but about reclaiming control over your own choices. And love, pure and untainted, is the bond that fortifies against every storm. I became vigilant without paranoia, confident without arrogance, and protective without rigidity. Each step we took was intentional, each boundary clear, each act of love deliberate. I understood now that empowerment comes from clarity, knowledge, and steadfast courage, not from luck or circumstance. Emotionally, I learned to separate past hurt from present action. I could feel anger without letting it dictate my decisions. I could recognize manipulation without succumbing to it. I could love Jason without fearing that trust equaled vulnerability. And in this newfound self-awareness, I found peace, the rare kind that comes only after surviving a storm you thought would never end. I also learned the subtle art of observing human nature without becoming ensnared in its darker threads. Betrayal, I realized, is not always about intention. Sometimes it is about choices made without foresight or empathy. Recognizing this allowed me to forgive, to release, and to move forward unburdened. In the quiet that followed, I often reflect on that night, the night Jason begged not to go home. That simple, desperate plea was more than a child's fear. It was a signal, a call to awaken, to see what was truly waiting inside. And inside, I found not just the manipulations and betrayals of others, but the strength, clarity, and courage that had always been within me. Life will test us. It will place people in our path who mislead, deceive, or even betray. It will place fears so intense that we wonder if we can survive. But the measure of our character is not in avoiding these storms, it is in how we rise through them. You cannot control every action of others, but you can control your response. You cannot always prevent deception, but you can arm yourself with truth and courage. And you cannot always predict the darkness of others, but you can illuminate your own path with clarity, love, and resilience. If there is one truth I can leave you with, it is this: the people who seem the most dangerous are often powerless against a heart and mind that refuse to be manipulated. Strength is quiet, patient, and deliberate. Courage is intimate, protective, and unwavering. And love, the love between a parent and child, the love that binds and nurtures, cannot be broken by deception or fear. So when life tempts you to run, to hide, or to surrender to fear, remember Jason's voice that night, begging not to go home. Sometimes, the greatest revelations, the truest awakenings, and the deepest victories await you exactly where you are, exactly when you must confront what is waiting inside. And in that confrontation, you will find not just survival, but freedom.